Good evening, folks, and happy Christmas, and welcome to the final show of 2020. Thank you so much for joining. This could go off in any direction because I've been on the booze for the last hour, so God knows what's going to happen. But I fully intend to finish this and the rest of the bottle during this show. So there we go. It's Christmas. I'm in full party mode, full holiday mode. This is the last kind of work commitment, if you like, for me for 2020. So on that basis, I fully plan to enjoy it, to enjoy myself. And after tonight, I am going to be switching off a little bit. I'm not saying there won't be any more videos. I'm sure there will be at some point. But we won't be doing any more live until we get into the new year. So this is the last one. So let's make it a cracking one. Lots of you already joining in. Lots of you, and no Christmas jumper. I did think about it. I thought about going full Christmas hat, Christmas jumper. I saw somebody say just a moment ago, I hope Elvis is going to bring cookies. I even thought of that. But I thought it was a bit selfish, me sitting in munching cookies whilst you lot are possibly not. But there we go. I chose to go for the whiskey instead. Anyway, we've got lots to talk about. The season may well be over, done and dusted. But since we last met a week ago on this very show, all sorts has happened, hasn't it? It's all kicked off. Driver announcements, team announcements, all sorts of stuff going on. Lewis last night won Sports Personality of the Year here in the UK. So much to talk about. So we've got plenty to crack through. I've got loads of questions already lined up, but I know that all of you guys are firing plenty in as we go. Hello to you all. Hello from... I'm not pissed yet, Clansom. I may well be by the end of the show, but not quite yet. Yeah, Josh Smith says, let's get wasted. Thank you to all of you who are regulars on this show, by the way. I'm recognising more and more all of the names every week. Josh Smith particularly, I know that you're always one of the first to join the chat. I do appreciate it. I dip in and out the chat all day on a Monday and really appreciate you all popping in to ask questions and have a little bit of a chat as we go. Jamie Zach says, what whiskey? It's a 12-year-old Macallan, this one, I think. The tragic news is it's almost finished. So we're going to have to crack open another one at some stage, but there we go. Anyway, should we talk some Formula One? Because there has been a lot happen, hasn't there? Hello to you all from all over the world. I'm going to dig into some questions. There's loads that you guys are already bringing up, quite rightly so, because so much has happened. But look, the biggest things, I guess, are the Perez news. So we'll definitely talk about that. Perez to Red Bull. I think it's my feeling on that. You may have seen the video I made earlier in the week. I think great move for Perez. I think great move for Red Bull, personally. I think it's a kind of match made in heaven from what was available. I think Perez has gone from teetering on the edge of his Formula One career potentially being over to landing himself, a prime drive. Outside of the Mercedes, that's the next best seat. And so I'd love to know all of your thoughts on all of that, of course. How will he fare against Max Verstappen? Will the team allow him to fully race against Max Verstappen? My feeling on that is yes, they absolutely will. Will he match up to him? Probably not in the early part of the season, at least, because Max is just very experienced with that car. He's very comfortable with it. He's very comfortable with the team. It's clearly a car that has a few nuances to it. Some kind of intricate ways or difficult ways of getting the best out of it, which a number of drivers haven't managed to do, but perhaps Sergio Perez can. And one thing I forgot to put in my video the other day, but somebody said to me, will Sergio Perez be able to adapt to the nuances of this Red Bull car? Particularly given that his car at the moment, the Racing Point, is so different in terms of concept. Well, it is, isn't it? But because it's a kind of copy of the Mercedes, but only for this year. And if you actually go back a year and beyond, it was actually a really quite extreme high rate car, the Racing Point. So actually Sergio Perez made a very quick and seemingly simple and easy transition from one to the other while still at Racing Point. Now, I know it's a full different prospect going to a new team with a different style of car, but he's shown that he can adapt between car styles, between aerodynamic concepts, and still get the best out of it. So I think if anybody's in with a good shout of this, maybe Sergio Perez is the man. So I'm excited to see what happens. I hope you guys are. I've seen lots of positive feedback on that decision. Con says a two-pronged attack against Mercedes, and that perhaps is the biggest win, assuming that Sergio Perez does actually manage to get the best of himself out of himself in 21. That's what Red Bull win here. Hopefully they win two drivers who can mix it at the front, who can challenge at the front, and therefore take the fight to Mercedes. Now, I'm not saying they're going to be able to overturn the might of Mercedes, but they are absolutely our best chance as fans, and they are the closest to them, by some margin. So therefore, having two guys in that fight will allow them more strategy options and definitely will be seen as a massive positive, as I said, assuming Sergio can get the job done. We'll definitely talk about Mazepin in a moment. We've got some questions lined up on that, so I will definitely get to that. Let's get through the Perez, Alex Albon stuff first, because I feel like that's perhaps the biggest news of the week. Checo's adaptable, says Clansom. I totally agree. I think that's one of the things that Red Bull will have seen in him, in that's one of his strengths. What about the noise from Alonso's Renault? Yeah, I knew that would come up at some point. Wasn't it good? Wasn't it good? So nice to hear that thing tearing around. I mean, that particular car for me was my nemesis, because when I was at McLaren over that spell working with Kimi, he was the guy that stopped us taking the world title in 2005, and it was that car. So, yeah, that's bittersweet. I hate it, but I also love it now because it sounded so, so good. And unfortunately, moments like that are all we're going to get, because we ain't going to get back to what we had years ago. We're not going to get back to screaming V8s or V10s or V12s with that level of noise. So it makes it perhaps even more special when we get a little moment with a car doing a demo run like that, and particularly in a sort of built-up street-type circuit of Abu Dhabi, where it's built up with buildings around it. You've got the noise reverberating. It was just awesome. I loved it. Absolutely enjoyed that one. What is the future for Albon? So, okay, so let's move on to Albon. Lots of people talking about Alex Albon, and I have got a question, I believe, lined up on that very subject from Yanni, who says this. Now that Albon's lost his seat at Red Bull, what's next for him in F1? Most likely AlphaTauri for 22 if Gasly leaves or if Tsunoda doesn't perform. So, first of all, let's spare a moment for Alex Albon. I feel very sorry for him. I feel sympathy for him in that he's an incredibly nice guy. One of the nicest guys in Formula One, I believe, I've ever met in terms of drivers, honestly. However, he hasn't performed, and sympathy, there isn't too much space in Formula One for sympathy because it's a high performance, it's elite performance industry, and therefore if you're not performing at an elite level, for whatever the reason, you can't afford to hang on to the seat, unfortunately for him. So I think it was the right decision from Red Bull's perspective, even though it's obviously a bit of a blow for Alex. So what next? He's still within the Red Bull family, as you now know. He's got that test and development drive. I absolutely, Yanni, agree with you. I think that's probably his best shot for 2022. And I think one of the reasons that's a really good shout for Alex Albon is that over the course of 2021, he's going to spend a lot of his time on development for the 22 car. Because development of the 21 car isn't going to last very long into the season. A huge chunk of that is done now. He'll do some simulator work, but he'll be working up for a large part of the year on the 22 car, which is a completely different car, completely different concept. It's going to take a different way of driving. Everyone's going to have to adapt to it. So there's a good argument to say that Alex Albon will be in actually a really decent state, potentially, by the time we get to 22, and therefore could be actually quite an attractive prospect for an AlphaTauri. If, like you say, if a Gasly either moves on and leaves the Red Bull family, or if Perez doesn't work out and they need to shuffle someone up the order. So Alex Albon, although this seems like a massive blow, could actually, if he works it well, if he plays his cards right, could end up being some positives in it for him, in that nobody else is going to have the mileage and the time and the experience with the 22 car by the time we start getting to real cars rolling out on a racetrack, as Alex Albon is potentially. So, he needs to make the most of that. It's done and dusted now. He now needs to find the positives. For me, that could be one of them. Let's see what you guys are saying. Albon and Bottas, the A team. It's the Red Bull meat grinder. They hung on with him, but he couldn't do it. I agree, Shane Dunn. They gave him more time than we've actually seen in recent years of anybody, haven't they? They gave him a little bit more patience. They gave him a bit more support, but he just couldn't deliver what they needed from him. And one of the things that I mentioned in my video the other day was that all of these chain of young drivers coming through that don't work in that Red Bull program when they get to the top tier, because the pressure, the environment isn't great. It's not a place conducive to elite human performance for a young kid who's trying to start out a Formula One career. Well, Sergio Perez is not that guy. He's not got the threat of some young kid over his shoulder taking away a whole, 10 years of Formula One from in front of him. He's had his Formula One career, he's on the way out, and he's got one last chance with a top team. So he can kind of go into this without the pressure that these young kids come into it with, without feeling the pressure that the Red Bull environment puts on him. And potentially, I think that could be a really strong suit for him inside that Red Bull family. It might also, though, highlight the thing that we all probably know and Red Bull have to start looking at is one of the problems with that Red Bull environment, that it's not working. They're getting some great drivers coming through, but when they get to the final step, it isn't working alongside Max. For whatever reason, it isn't working out. Do you think if Alex had got that first win when he was taken out by Lewis that things would have been different? George Alaimo. So George, somebody else mentioned this to me the other day. It may have been you even on Twitter, I'm not sure. I do think that confidence was a huge part of Alex Albon's problems this year, but I don't think it was the only problem. And I don't think that had he had a bit of a boost in confidence with a race win, it would have transformed everything. I think that he was struggling the actual mechanics of driving that car, adapting his style to get the best out of the way that car produces its downforce was the thing he couldn't manage to do. And for me, I don't think a win would have necessarily changed that. Yeah, a bit more confidence absolutely is a winner. It, helps you as a driver or as a sportsman. Of course it does. Whether it would have made enough of a leap to be able to mix it and challenge and be there to support Max, I don't think so. So I think it would have changed things, but probably not enough. How many lap 1 collisions between Max and Checo in 21, says John Norris. See, that is going to be interesting, isn't it? I mean, we don't know how Checo's going to perform in that car. We know what Max can do, and it's absolutely blistering quick. He's the benchmark for any driver coming into that team. But, we've got high hopes for Checo. He could find himself on the same bit of tarmac as Max Verstappen for a large part of next season, maybe. That's what Red Bull hope to some extent, because that means they're both fighting at the front. But then they get into an issue that they haven't had for a few years, really, since the Mark Webber, Sebastian Vettel, maybe the Max Verstappen, Daniel Ricciardo era, where they were fighting each other, and that throws a whole new dynamic, a whole new challenge for the management team at Red Bull to try and overcome. And you've got to say, if that throws itself up, if that's a reality, things might well start to favour Max in some of those situations, and Checo might find himself on this very short-term contract as things stand, taking a back seat. But look, that's speculation, we don't know. And actually, whoever ends up being the number one driver at Red Bull will be whoever's fastest. And I honestly believe that. If Checo suddenly came in and was quicker than Max Verstappen consistently, he'll get the prime calls, he'll get the first choice on strategy and everything else. I don't think that's going to happen, because to overturn Max's experience and his talent anyway is a huge ask. But look, it could be an interesting one to watch when they're very close to each other on the racetrack. Checo says it's if he's within 2 to 3 tenths of Max, that'd be a good start. And I agree. I think that's exactly. He needs to do better than Alex Albon. And I think with Checo, what he'll do is he'll gradually, which is what Alex hasn't really been able to do, is find ways to adapt his style and bring himself closer as the season goes on. If next year's Red Bull's hard on its tyres, Checo could stack up well against Max. Alex Griffin. A good point. That's another one of his absolute strengths, isn't it? In looking after tyres and getting them through a Grand Prix fast, at speed, but without wearing them out as quickly as many others. He's got this very gentle, smooth style on the tyres when he needs to have it. And that's been a huge strength of his. What if Perez does no better than Gasly or Albon at Red Bull, says Antonin Simon. And that is a really good point. I think we're all looking at this saying, look, we think Checo's going to do better. And I genuinely believe he will do better. But if he doesn't, what does that say? Well, I'm not sure what it says. It probably says that, yes, that Red Bull is has all these nuances around its characteristics. And they are something very difficult to overcome, to adapt to. Max has grown into that car. I mean, I know he won in his first race, so he came in and the car really suited him, or he suited the car very, very well. But he's been there now for a few years, and that car has been developed, in conjunction with Max. He's been the only constant at that team. So of course it's been developed in conjunction with Max, because the other drivers keep chopping and changing. There's nobody there long enough to have too much influence on car development. So it's a Max car, absolutely. So if Checo isn't quick enough, if he's still a decent chunk off Max, well then Red Bull, they need to take a very long, hard look at themselves and how they approach the next step. Because unless Tsunoda, who's just stepped into the programme at AlphaTauri suddenly starts absolutely blitzing things, and they can manage to get him a test in a 21 Red Bull, and he shows good signs there, well then you might have an option. But I guess the other thing to look forward to is that 22, which is when Checo's on a 1-year contract, I believe, at the moment. In 22, as I touched on earlier, everything changes. The cars all change, so it's a bit of a reset for everybody. So there's nothing to say the way the Red Bull drives and handles right now will be how it drives and handles in 22. In fact, it almost certainly won't be like that. So I think, over the course of this year, there'll be some sort of reset anyway ahead of 22, and that opens up things to, I guess, any driver at that point. Right, let's see. How about that young driver Alonso? I reckon he'll be big in the future. I mean, that's hilarious, isn't it? How funny is that? Fernando Alonso, young driver test. Absolute joke. But there you go. Good to see him back in the car anyway. I'm looking forward to seeing how he gets on, and also how he works with the team, how he leads that team. I was reading today, Pat Fry, who was my old mate and colleague at McLaren, talking about how Daniel Ricciardo has been an absolute leader at the team, talking about getting motivation back up after a tough result. He's incredibly good at that, and has stood out as being incredibly good at that. Well, he's gone. So is Esteban Ocon that good at doing that? I think probably not yet. He's too young, he's not experienced enough. Is Fernando Alonso good at doing that? In my experience, absolutely not. I mean, I know he's grown up and moved on a lot since I was working with him, but I don't get the impression that's one of his big strengths necessarily in leading a team. Leading his own little team, absolutely, but not perhaps leading a team, big team. So that could be a challenge in the Alonso era at Renault this time around. Right, shall we shuffle it on? What other questions have I got here? I think, oh yeah, here's a good one, and I promise you we'll get to Mazepin in a moment. Let's get to this one because this was interesting. Jonathan Bradbury in the chat earlier on says, what influence is Jost Capito within the Mercedes group? What are the odds that he's been primed to take over Toto's seat? I think that was a really interesting point. So Jost Capito, again, I touched on it in my video the other day, has been appointed CEO of Williams. So it brings him back into Formula One after a very brief spell at McLaren, where everybody I speak to, and I mean everybody I speak to at McLaren, had nothing but amazing things to say about him. He was a Ron Dennis appointment, and therefore when the new management came in and took over, unfortunately for him, he was one of the first to go. And that was a blow to everybody in the team because they were all looking forward to his vision for what the future of the organisation should look like. Now, McLaren have moved on and they've done things, things are going in the right direction. So, maybe that's a justifiable change, but he has a lot to offer to a team and to Formula One, and now Williams can benefit from that. 1 second. Mercedes, though, of course, are partnering with Williams in that they supply engines, and we know about the deal with George Russell being sort of leased out, if you like, to Williams from that Mercedes driver program. So is Jost Capito somehow being groomed to take over at Mercedes? My feeling is not. Not that he couldn't do it. I think he would be an absolutely brilliant appointment in that area. I think he's great. But I honestly believe that Mercedes and Toto are grooming somebody from within the organisation. I've got ideas who it is, but I don't think anybody knows yet. And I don't want to mention it because, I might get myself into trouble. But I think that somebody within the organisation is going to step up into not exactly Toto's role, because I think they're going to change the roles. And Toto, as you know now, has just signed a new 3-year deal, taking a slightly larger percentage in the team. So Toto's staying. He's not going anywhere. But we do know that Toto doesn't necessarily want to have the same level of involvement that he's had over the last few years. He wants to balance his work-life commitments a little bit better. And that means maybe he doesn't want to go to every Grand Prix. And so I think we're going to see some changes in the role itself as well as the people doing those roles. And maybe Toto's role gets split up into a couple of different people rather than the one-man band that it is leading the whole organisation at the moment. So that's what I think is going to happen. I think we're going to get somebody moved up. I think Jost Capito, he's taking on a CEO role at Williams. I don't think that's going to be a short-term appointment. I think he's there for the long haul to try and bring that organisation under their new ownership back to some kind of glory days. So, and I think he's a great person to do that. So I think Jost Capito will be great for Williams. I think Toto, it's great that Toto's sticking around at Mercedes because he'll be able to oversee whatever direction they go in next. Do you predict a reshuffle at the top at Ferrari? Do I predict a reshuffle? Do I predict it? The thing is, do I think he should have one? Probably. Do I predict it? Probably not, because from what I have seen and what we've all seen of Ferrari in recent years, they don't always make the decisions that we might assume would be right. You know, the most obvious decisions, the decisions that we might look on from the outside and say, look, you've got to be doing this or you can't be doing that. They often seem to go the opposite way. And I don't want to criticise too heavily because we don't know exactly what's going on inside that organisation. And actually with the progress that they seem to be making on the power unit, they may well be right back up the order in 2021. I kind of hope they are. Because the car wasn't bad at some races, was it? It was the power unit that massively let them down. And they say they've made some massive gains on that front. So let's see where Ferrari go. But if they're quick and if they are fighting back at the front, well, they won't see a need for a reshuffle, will they? Because results, you know, determine whether people are happy or not. So that would be my take on that one. Right, on the subject of, oh, well, let's get this one in. Do you think McLaren will win again next season? Dire Raven. I think they will. I do think they will. I think, I think it's going to be, there's a lot of unknowns about McLaren in terms of how the power unit and chassis and aero package marry up with each other. But don't forget, the aero surfaces are open, so that's still up for development. That's the one area that's still kind of relatively free for development. Yes, they've had to somehow adapt the chassis to take the Mercedes power unit, but they say that's gone really well without too much compromise. In theory, they might not be hampered by that transition, and actually they might just benefit from the power increase. And I think best guesstimates seem to put a power increase at Mercedes over Renault at somewhere between 20 and 25 horsepower, maybe even more in terms of outright power. But I also think there's a huge chunk of drivability gains and reliability gains in most areas. So McLaren tend to stand to gain from taking the Mercedes power unit. And with a great driver lineup, Daniel Ricciardo for me is still one of the best drivers in Formula One. Lando Norris, also incredibly exciting driver, short on experience at this point, but with plenty of room to grow, and a team that has found something to celebrate. Third place in the championship last year may not be the kind of things that we'd have been celebrating or we looked to celebrate when I was at the team, but that was a different era. And just look at where they've come from, rock bottom almost at McLaren. Now they had something to spray champagne around the garage for at the end of a season. And it brought, proper warmth to my heart to see the guys and girls in the garage in Abu Dhabi celebrating, because that hasn't happened at the end of a season for a long, long time. So that mood in the camp is right up here, and that will continue. That momentum will continue. We've got a short off season before we get into next season. That momentum is going to, carry through. And the positives of the Mercedes engine, Daniel Ricciardo, I think that there's every chance they could win a Grand Prix next year, maybe even more. Who knows? So yeah, absolutely. I think things are looking up for McLaren. I want to bring this question in from John Jedison quickly before we get back to that, because he was talking about Toto. He says, hey Mark, really simple question. Would you have liked to work for Toto? Or is there any other team boss you would have liked to work for? Love your videos, especially the walk around the lake. Keep up the good work. Thank you very much, John. Yes, I would have loved to work for Toto. I think for me, and look, one of the things I do now is many of you know this, I now fly around the world talking to businesses, big companies, massive organisations sometimes, about how Formula One operates, how they build high-performing teams, how management structures create a high-performing team culture within a business. Basing all of that information and that knowledge off my background in Formula One. I've seen it, I've been in it. Ron Dennis was an absolute master at it. And for me, Toto Wolff is not the new Ron Dennis, because they're completely different, but he is the new visionary in terms of how a Formula One structure should work, how a Formula One team and organisation should work, how you get the best out of every single person in that organisation. These are the things I talk about. I often refer back to Toto Wolff when I'm doing my talks, because he's such an inspirational leader. I love the way Toto doesn't micromanage. He knows he's not the best technical brain. He knows that he's not the best mechanical brain. He steps back and lets those those people, those experts within his organisation do his job. And what he does is creates the culture around them so they can enjoy themselves, they can be happy at work, they can be free of too much pressure, they can take risks without fear of failure or without fear of reprisal when they have a failure. So, for me, he's one of the best bosses. So yes, I would have loved to have worked for him and with him. And I guess to answer the other team boss, for me, Ron Dennis, there is nobody better. At the time, I hated it on many occasions. If you've read my book, you'll know he was the most frustrating guy in the world, but he was also brilliant and a genius and a visionary that was so far ahead of his time that I think if he was still involved in Formula One now, he would have adapted. I know that his methods back then they've got no place, a bit like Bernie, they've got no place in today's Formula One. But Ron was so adaptive, so futuristic and visionary that I'm sure he would have adapted and been still leading the way. So I've loved working for Ron. I massively appreciate what he achieved and what he did. And I feel like Toto is, although a very different path, a very similar inspirational leader. So I hope that answers your question. Right, why do so many people hate Lewis Hamilton, Dire Raven? I've got no idea. I have no idea. There are a few people in this world. Mike Brewer, my co-host of Wheeler Dealers, is another one. One of the nicest blokes I've ever met, Mike Brewer. Absolute legend of the game. He's a friend of mine. He is genuinely one of the nicest people you could meet, and yet the hate he gets online is mind-blowing. And it's the same for Lewis. Lewis is a nice guy. He's trying his best to do good things in the world, both on the racetrack and away from it, and he gets some absolute disgraceful hate. I think it's shocking. I don't understand it. I really don't. And I have no idea. There's an element of jealousy. There's an element of ignorance that people don't understand a lot of the things that he's talking about and shouting about and standing for. So yes, there's there are a number of reasons. I don't really understand them all, but I find it bizarre. There we go. Let me see. Where's Ron currently? What's he doing? Could you shed some light? Pushcart, that is a good question. And I've actually been recently trying to get in touch with Ron because I've lost touch with him. I haven't had actual contact with him for a couple of years. Actually, since I wrote my book, I wrote a chapter on Ron. And before I put it in the book, I thought, just out of courtesy, I'd send it to Ron. So I sent him, a pre-script of the book before it went off to print or was signed off. The chapter on Ron, and I said, look, here you go. I just thought I'd let you know, see what you think of it, because actually some of it I'm taking the piss out of him. And I heard nothing for ages. And I thought, oh God, that was probably a bad idea. He obviously hates it. And eventually he wrote back, and he wrote back just very simple, but he just said, thanks for sharing. He said, I think that since you left the team, he said, you found your calling. He said, you're a very good writer. I love what you did. He said, it even made me chuckle. He said, carry on and go and make a career out of it. So I thought that was lovely. He's got a sense of humour, Ron. Not many people see it, but he definitely has one. So yeah, there you go. So what he's doing now is he's in a number of, he's working in business industry. He's actually working on a government panel. I think he's leading a government panel to do with innovation. I think it's an innovation panel. I forget what they actually call it now. So he's leading the UK Government Innovation Panel or Committee. That's working across industry, I believe, in the UK and abroad. So he's very much at the forefront of that. He's also, I think, maybe on the board of a couple of other companies, but that's his biggest thing, I believe, is working on this government committee. So all about innovation, which is, of course, one of the things Ron was so good at. But yeah, nothing to do with sport or Formula One, as far as I know. But if I can get in touch with him, because I've got a great video idea that I'm trying to pitch to him, if I can get in touch with him, I'll let you know. It would be fun to have Ron back in F1. Same buzz as Alonso and a lot more fun. I'd love to see. That's partly why I want to speak to Ron. I'd love to know what he thinks of things now, both at McLaren and also in the wider Formula One world. Ron's a legend, deserves to be knighted alongside Lewis. I agree with you. I do think, actually, you'll have seen, I'm sure, some of the charitable things that Ron does, particularly did providing meals for NHS frontline staff. That was something that he did in the build-up or the beginning of this pandemic. So he put a lot of effort and a lot of money into a kind of organisation to provide free meals at the front line for those people who just didn't have time to stop or didn't have the the means to go and find a meal in a canteen because they were all closed down or they were overrun. So I thought he did some great stuff there. Let me see. Does Ron like whiskey? I don't know. I imagine he does. I mean, I've seen Ron very drunk. Whether he was drinking whiskey, I'm not sure. Right, let's move it on, shall we? Right, let's get on to Mazepin because there are so many questions on this. I know that I appreciate you, by the way, not flooding the timeline with hashtag we say no to Mazepin. I 100% agree with that statement, and if you wanted to flood it, that's fine, but we wouldn't get any more questions flowing through, so I appreciate that. But look, I'm massively behind that campaign. I am amazed we haven't heard anything yet. Craig Poole says, this one, he says, "G'day Mark, with all the negative press and pressure starting to pile up regarding Mazepin, I do think Haas will forego the money and replace him with Hulk or another pay driver." And that is a really good place to start this conversation. I'm sure you'll have seen the sort of Twitter buzz around him removing F1 driver from his Twitter bio and what's his name? Pafiti adding Haas F1 driver into his. Of course, that's got people chatting massively. But look, I think the point of all of this is that I think we all agree that what he did was disgraceful and absolutely has to be dealt with properly and not behind closed doors. This is a public matter that's gained a massive amount of public anger and it needs to be dealt with. Yes, they can deal with it behind closed doors, but the last thing we need is some kind of secret agreement like the FIA Ferrari engine thing. We definitely don't want that. John Dedison, like this video before Marc's mum gives out. Yeah, I don't know if mum's on tonight, but yeah, you better like the video before my mum gets involved. So yes, I think that we've got to give the Haas F1 team the respect that they say they're dealing with it internally, and we have to say they're going to take it seriously. So we've got to give them the time and the space to do that. But look, it has to be dealt with, and it has to be dealt with very seriously because, and also from an F1 perspective as well. And as I think I mentioned before, the problem that Haas have is that his money or his dad's money has effectively saved the team. That team was on the brink of collapse. And I believe I believe they had almost made the decision to fold the team at Gene Haas's level. The Mazepin family, I think his family effectively have saved the team, and with it a whole load of jobs, livelihoods. So it is quite a complex scenario. I think what they need. Hey, Mum is on. Hey, Mum, how you doing? Sorry, I can't see you at Christmas. Maybe we should have this chat another day. Anyway, thanks very much. Everybody start liking the video. I want to see those likes racking up. 228 at the moment. So yes, this needs to be dealt with, and I'm surprised to some extent that Formula One itself, and again we've got to give them a little bit of time to deal with this, but at the moment they're standing very much in the background saying we're going to let Haas F1 team deal with it. They've got a massive campaign of equality and inclusivity and this hashtag we race as one. They've got to stand up to that. That can't just be a hashtag. They have to act on those things. And, for me, Formula One need to help Haas find a way. If it's as simple as, if they don't take the Mazepin money, the team collapses, there's got to be a way around that. Formula One has got to be able to help with that. There must be solutions. Now, I know it must be a lot of money, but I think off the back of this campaign and off the back of this disastrous turn of events, I feel so sorry for the Haas F1 team because this is another massive blow. I mean, all right, they've made the decision to put him in, like they made the decision to take on Rich Energy, which was another PR disaster. They made those awful decisions, so the sympathy has to be, can't speak, the sympathy has to be limited to some extent. But they were their decisions, and they're all backfiring in their face. So yeah, for me, I don't think I want to see him on a Formula One grid. If he does make it to the first race of next year, can you imagine the backlash? Imagine how the Haas F1 team and their PR is just going to be a disaster. They won't get any positive messaging out because it's going to be overwhelmed by a campaign to get him out of the car. So I imagine what's happening is they are taking it very seriously, and they're probably trying very hard behind the scenes to find a solution that that means they can survive without his money. But that's not an easy thing to do. If there were lots of people with that amount of money willing to put it into Formula One, we'd have plenty of teams on the grid. We wouldn't be in such dire straits that Formula One's in financially. So tough call, but I do think that Formula One needs to step up here and back up their hashtags with some proper action. Take another swig of the whiskey, says Tim. I will. Thanks, mate. Right. So Gust says, playing devil's advocate, she said it was a joke and that they are friends. Who are we to judge? She did say that, and that is going to be a factor that has to be taken into account. Personally, and this is just my opinion based on nothing else other than the facts that I've seen, as you all have, I don't believe that for 1 second. I'm not sure many of us do. But yes, that was what she said. So we have to take that, at face value at this point. But I think she's also gone on to say a lot of other things since then. So what needs to happen ultimately is a full investigation into this. Whether it's led internally by Haas F1 team or externally by F1, there needs to be a full investigation, because if she's changed her mind or if she was, forced to say such things, that needs to be uncovered as well, equally as important. So I don't want to judge too abruptly because, as I say, they are dealing with it. I just want to make sure, I hope at least, I have no influence on this, but I hope that we are made fully aware of the findings of any investigation and that this isn't kept behind closed doors. Fine to do the investigation in-house, but make sure the world knows what's happened as a result, in my opinion. Right. Let's see. Right, let's move it on. I've got a question here around DAS from Fergal Tierney, who says, hi Mark, how much of an advantage do you reckon that the Mercedes F1 team will lose from the outlawing of DAS in 2021? In which races do you think they gained most from it this year? So that's a good question. It's not one that we can very easily quantify in terms of lap time or in terms of ultimate performance, but absolutely they are losing a tool from their armoury next year. And, you talk about races where it could help. It's definitely the races where tyre warm-up is an issue. So, for example, in the really cold races like Portugal, for example, where ambient temperature and track temperature was so cold that tyre warm-up was one of the biggest problems. Well, they had a big advantage, and I think I'm right in saying, if you remember back, I think we had a safety car or a virtual safety car, and the restarts in that race, Mercedes blitzed it because, or Lewis at least blitzed it, because they weren't struggling or suffering as much with tyre warm-up as some of the others. So there's a good example of where it definitely will have worked for them. Only they know to what extent they used it. And the obvious ones are things like warm-up for front tyres on the way to the grid for a race start, for example, which is, again, very difficult to quantify, but absolutely they will have numbers, they will have data on it, they will know what they were gaining from it. But there were also, and obviously safety car restarts and all of those kind of things, pit stops, anything where you need to get tyre temperature in are obvious. But there are also potential ways to utilise that system. As I talked about on the very first day when this system was unveiled, we talked about the potential for it. Well, I mean, there are other potentials, like, for example, if you really got on top of it and you started developing it over years, you might find ways to use it to down the straights, for example, when tyre warm-up's not such an issue, to minimise that front wheel scrubbing and effectively reduce any rolling resistance, so increasing top speeds. I'm not sure Mercedes ever got to that level of playing with it in the course of 2020 because it was an outlawed system beyond this year. They perhaps only had limited scope to use it, and the obvious things were tyre warm-up, as I say, at the start of the race and those other moments. So Perhaps we'll never know just how much of an advantage that DAS could have been in the end, but I absolutely think Mercedes will miss it. I think it will be something that they will have... I mean, of course they benefited from it, otherwise they wouldn't have had it on the car. There's a weight penalty that comes with it. They would have taken it off if it wasn't giving them an advantage. So, yes, they're going to miss that, but I still think the car's got enough performance in other areas that perhaps it's not going to be a huge differentiator. But if you're a Red Bull chasing them down, if they lose one of the tools from their armoury, you're going to be pretty happy with that. Clansom says, I don't think they really used it. And they definitely did. They definitely used it. I'm pretty sure in every race. I don't know to what extent beyond things like the starts, but they always used it to warm up tyres. I mean, there were a couple of races where actually overheating tyres was an issue, and there's potential in that instance, again, to minimise the tow at certain points, to stop the scrubbing, to minimise the overheating. Again, I don't know whether they managed to develop to a point where they could use it in all of those scenarios, or whether they were fairly limited to just using it for tyre warm-up, but they definitely used it. Is Merc keeping the black livery? I don't know the answer to that, Jamie Zach. I don't know. But if you like, I'll try and find out for you. I can send a message to the team and see if they come back to me. I'll let you know. No dogs barking in the background. No, they're on strict instructions to be shut down and be quiet in the other room. This time of night anyway, they're just fast asleep. Do we see DAS in the future somewhere? So that's an interesting point. Could it be used somewhere else? Well, other race series that don't necessarily have the strict or that specific wording that's that's been written into the F1 regs, then there's absolutely potential to use that. There aren't too many that have the development potential or the scope or the financial resource to be able to develop something like that, but the genie's out the bottle now, isn't it? So that tool, unless it's specifically banned from another championship, could absolutely find its way into it. Whether there's much scope for it outside of the world of racing in road cars, probably not in terms of tow adjustment, because a road car just doesn't need that level of accuracy, and the benefits of changing it probably are just too complex. Having said that, road car technology is moving forward at such an incredible rate that maybe it will, but I'd say motorsport is absolutely where its benefit really lies. Griptopia, watch him, Marc. Hey mate, how you doing? Is there anything new in the cars next year? Nick Falul. I'm sorry, Nick Falul. I know you, Nick, because you pop up on my Twitter all the time. I've always wondered how I pronounce your name. Nick Falul. Is that right? Sorry, I forgot it wrong. Is there anything new in the cars next year? Well, you may well already know, and lots of you will know, there's a big aero change to the cars next year. So DAS goes. Tyres and wheel sizes stay the same, and that doesn't change. That's been pushed back, as we know. There's an aero change to the rear of the floor, just ahead of the rear wheels of the car, which will make a reasonably big difference in terms of overall downforce loss. That's with the idea of slowing the cars down. The tyre compounds change slightly. You'll have seen they were testing those. Didn't get a great feedback from the drivers in Abu Dhabi. They said they were slower, they were more difficult to keep in the window. But of course, that was on a 2020 car that had a lot more downforce than the 2021 car will have, or different levels of downforce. Pirelli say they've designed that tyre with that 2021 car in mind, and it will work a lot better in conjunction with the car that we're going to see next year. Only time will tell. Now, somebody sent me a message earlier, I didn't manage to screenshot it, about tyres, saying, you know, with this negative feedback that a lot of the drivers have given about the tyres, why are we persisting with them? Why are we pursuing all this with Pirelli? I need to just touch on that, because Pirelli get a huge amount of grief. Some of it is absolutely justified. You know, Pirelli could do better at times, but the fact that the Pirelli tyres are pretty rubbish by most people's counts is actually down to the mandate they're given by Formula One. So Formula One tell them what kind of tyre they want, and that's what Pirelli then deliver. So a lot of the hatred and the cussing that's sent towards Pirelli isn't deserved, because actually it should be redirected towards Formula One, because they have said we want a tyre that will only operate in a very sort of narrow temperature window. We want one that will tail off at the end of a certain number of laps to degrade and lose performance. And that's what Pirelli have come up with. And there are a number of races when we all shout and scream at the telly going, this is ridiculous. You know, why on earth are the tyres so temperature sensitive? Because it's they fall out the window, people disappear off the performance chart. That's what Formula One have asked them for. So as James Kaczynski says there, Pirelli delivers what is ordered. Absolutely. That's the problem. So Formula One need to reassess what they want from the sport, but the next opportunity really to do that is for 2022. And there's going to be a lot of work already going on, and certainly as we get into 21, factoring in what the 2022 cars will require from their tyres. It's a whole new sport almost in 2022. I'm really excited to see what happens, but the tyres for that year are the next opportunity to deliver a whole new mandate to Pirelli to say we want something different, if indeed we do. Let me see. Will we ever see any brand new teams? I think we will see brand new teams, because with the cost cap and the structure that Formula One's put in place financially in terms of cost for entering, cost for getting involved and running a team, compared to potential reward and the more equitable split of prize money, it's now a much more attractive proposition. So yes, I think we'll see new teams, because I can't see the likes of Haas hanging around forever. This is a team based on the whim, if you like, of one guy, Gene Haas. I don't want to say it's a plaything, because it's much more serious than that, but this is him funding it, bankrolling it, and when he's had enough, he'll walk away, and that team will then become available. So I think it's much more likely that a new team will buy an existing team rather than we increase the number of teams in the short term. Quitima says, why are the cars stripped for paint and repainted for every race? That's a good point. I mean, actually, they're not every race, particularly when we have a tough schedule like we've had in 2020. There just simply wasn't time in between every race. But on what we used to have, which is a sort of a race every fortnight, more or less, we did strip the cars and repaint them every race. The reason being that this is Formula One and the car has to roll out of your garage looking immaculate. I mean, I'm coming from a McLaren background where Ron Dennis levels of attention to detail are across everything, and everything has to be brand new and spotless and looking pristine every time it rolls out the garage. And again, I think I put this in my book, but even down to like the shirts we used to wear as mechanics, bear in mind, mechanics rolling around on the floor fixing dirty racing cars, we'd have a white shirt, and if our shirt got dirty, we'd have to run out the back of the garage to a great big box of spare white shirts and go and put another one on, because Ron Dennis didn't want anybody looking scruffy, dishevelled, filthy, dirty. He didn't want us to look like we were a messy, mucky, unorganised, unprofessional team. And, it was a frustrating pain in the arse at the time when you're desperately trying to fix a car and you're now starting to look at yourself thinking, hang on, am I acceptable to Ron Dennis standards now? When actually all I really want to do is make this car go more quickly around a racetrack. You'd have to be running out and getting changed. Massively frustrating. But the reason he did it was that our team at McLaren stood out head and shoulders, and we did, head and shoulders above every other team because of the way that we were presented, the way our garage was presented, our cars were presented. And you might go, well, that's ridiculous, but we got some of the biggest partners and sponsors. We were one of the most financially stable teams in the pit lane for a huge amount of time. At a time, going through some really difficult times, particularly at the end of the tobacco era, when lots of teams were struggling and panicking about the future, we secured a really long-term deal with Vodafone that kind of secured our financial future when everyone else was panicking. And that was partly because, even if just in some small degree, we stood out as being more professional and better prepared and immaculate than any other team on the grid. Because if you're a big sponsor, an A-list partner wanting to get into Formula One, that's who you want to be associated with. So that is why they repaint cars and they polish cars constantly and they clean the garage floors every time the car leaves the garage, and everyone's looking as smart and as immaculate as you can. Everybody does it now, but this was something that Ron Dennis kind of started back in the day, and it's kind of changed the face of Formula One. So that was a long-winded answer to your question of why they repaint the cars, but that's kind of the theory behind it. Right. I've seen mechanics using gaffer tape on bodywork. Do you know the reasons for this? The cars don't look damaged when mechanics do this. George, if you're talking about the clear tape that teams use, it's often to seal the gaps between bodywork, the shut lines. It's to seal them for aerodynamic purposes, because you don't want airflow, first of all, tripping over the gap, but also seeping inside. If there's a slight misalignment in shut lines, you don't want air getting through those gaps because it's massively turbulent, it's draggy. So that's the biggest thing. So Adrian Newey would insist on every single shut line being taped with this, we used to call it helicopter tape, really flexible, clear tape. So that's the reason. It's an aero tweak, tiny little details, the things that matter. Why? Oh, here we go. Andrew Storm. Why hasn't Hamilton signed a contract? Great question. And do you know, I don't know the answer. I was expecting to hear the news of Hamilton signing a contract before today. I thought we'd be able to talk about it tonight because I thought it would be done and dusted. We haven't heard yet. And whilst I still, everything about me says I fully expect Lewis to continue, particularly now that Toto is properly signed up for another 3 years. For me, that would be the thing that I think Lewis will want as a security if he's going to sign for another 2 or maybe 3 years. But why hasn't he signed it yet? Is it just posturing? Is it just looking for another nought on the end of his contract? I'm not sure. I think there must be something, whether it's to do with this whole Ineos involvement and buy into the team, whether it's to do with the length of the term of his contract, whether it's to do with any of his sort of personal sponsorship negotiations or branding opportunities. I mean, who knows? I don't know the details. None of us know the details. There's no point in really guessing too much. But it's definitely strange that we're at this point and we still haven't got a contract signed. Toto said the other day, we're under no pressure. There's no time pressure to do that. We could even let it roll into 2021 and it wouldn't be a problem. Well, it's not a problem as long as he signs. If he doesn't sign, it's a massive problem. A bit like what they had when Nico Rosberg dropped him in the shit just, weeks before the season was due to start again in 2016. So I think Toto, the fact that Toto's saying that may well be that they are absolutely 100% going to get this done and they are literally dotting the I's and crossing the T's. That's the way I expect it. I expect it to be done and announced very, very soon. But it is a strange one. So I'm afraid I don't really know the answer. I don't know why it hasn't been signed. I don't buy this, well, we haven't had time. You have time if it's important. So maybe Lewis has given some sort of assurance that, he absolutely intends to sign. It's just a case of figuring out these details. So that's probably what's happening. What's the fastest you've driven a road car? I can't tell you that. Mind you, have you ever seen this club? There's a club called the 200 mile an hour club. I was hoping, I really was gutted that I didn't get to do this for my 200th video on the channel. I wanted to do the 200th video on the channel whilst doing 200 miles an hour. There's a club, Supercar Owners Club, which a couple of my friends are in, where you take cars to airstrips, runways, and they have speed guns. Excuse me, the whiskey's taking hold. They have speed guns to check your speed, and people basically set out to try and break 200 miles an hour. I haven't done it yet, but I have plans to do it in the new year. So I haven't been 200 miles an hour in a road car before, but maybe you'll see that coming to the channel in the new year. Keep an eye out. 7 minutes to beer o'clock, Clansom. Thank you, but it's definitely whiskey o'clock tonight. Yeah, 7 minutes to go. Right, what else do you want to talk about? If Hamilton doesn't sign, Williams will have to find a new driver. Well, you'd imagine that would be the way, wouldn't you? I'm sure that would cost an awful lot of money to Mercedes because Williams are not keen on releasing George Russell from next year. They absolutely want him in the team, but anything's possible if enough cash changes hands. So yes, absolutely. McLaren tuned with Lando and Daniel. That would be so funny. I'd love to see it. I absolutely agree with you. Wouldn't that be good? They will be hilarious together, by the way, won't they? And also, they'll be hilarious, on one hand, in front of the camera, massively motivating for the team, but they're also very serious behind the scenes, both of them, in getting that job done in the car. So yeah, really excited about McLaren's future. Oh, here's one. Here's a good one. Scuderia Chip Rockets. He says this, a genuine question, could we run Abu Dhabi in reverse and would that be better? So I hadn't really thought about this. I mean, we've talked about running circuits the other way around before. Most circuits, most traditional circuits, you can't do it because there are issues with runoff areas and marshal posts and access points, and they're just not designed that way. So I had a little look. So let's have a look at the Abu Dhabi circuit. I've got a picture here. So let's look at it. This is the Abu Dhabi Track Map. At the moment, of course, I don't know if you can quite see that arrow, but that central line down to turn 1, you can see we head down, so down that sector 1, the red sector, towards turn 1, and we turn left, don't we? That's the first corner. So let's imagine this all going the other way round. Now, I've been around the whole circuit trying to figure out, would it be better? Before we talk about, is it possible, would it be better? Looking at that, I've been through all of this. I'm not sure I don't think it's any worse. I think maybe turn 21 might provide a slightly better overtaking opportunity. There's more runoff actually going this way round in 21 than there is at the current turn 1, which you sort of run up against a wall at the end of that straight. So turn 21 as it sits there might make some better overtaking opportunities over that short straight. It's not a very long straight, so it's a minimal chance. Then we go through the rest of that sector there, the yellow sector, what's normally sector 3. If that became sector 1, it's a bit of it doesn't really change. It's still a bit of a nothing sector, isn't it? It's still that horrible, frustrating, slightly slow sector through there. But what you do at this way round, of course, is whereas on a normal lap of Abu Dhabi, we finally get into sector 3, which is the hardest bit on tyres, and we destroy our tyres towards the end of the lap, overheating them, losing performance. This way round, of course, you do that very early on in the lap. And then you come through the sector 2 and that long straight. So what happens here is you go into that blue section, if you like, sector 2, you come out of turn 11 onto that long straight. It's pretty much the same because you've got a 90-degree corner at the other end, 90-degree left. And then we have that really tight corner onto the second long straight and DRS zone. So maybe we'd have a slightly bigger opportunity or a bigger braking zone going into turn 7 because it's a hairpin. Now, not much, because actually turn 8, the way it is currently, is still a really tight corner. But turn 7, goes into a hairpin, so maybe it's a tiny bit slower. You've got to scrub a little bit more speed off. Maybe it extends the braking zone a tiny amount and perhaps increases the overtaking opportunities, but not very much. The pit lane still works. That was the other thing I was concerned about. They've got this slightly weird pit lane. It's not shown on that map, but it sort of works. I don't think it's actually an issue. I still think you'd be able to get in coming off turn 4 or turn 3 rather. You'd still find your way in. You'd have that tricky weird thing going under the bridge to get into the pit lane rather than on the way out, but it all sort of works. So first of all, I don't think it's that much better. I think maybe a tiny bit better, but not much. Doesn't make a huge amount of difference. Is it possible? I actually think it probably is. And unlike most dedicated circuits, like like a Silverstone, for example, Abu Dhabi's a little bit different. It is in this built-up area, and actually most of the corners are very tight, and there's not a huge amount of runoff in most places anyway. So I don't think it really is affected too much. So in theory, I reckon with a bit of work, and it would take some work, obviously, we could make that work. We could go the other way around. So is it worth it? Well, look, what has 2020 shown us? Sometimes it's just worth trying things that, even on paper, may not look like they might deliver some results. Just give it a go. Experimentation is often absolutely brilliant. And what 2020, I think, has shown us, probably in terms of Formula One, but also just in terms of the world in general, if you get an opportunity, maybe it's worth just trying it, just giving it a go. What's the worst that could happen? So that's my theory on that one. Yes, it's probably possible with a bit of work, and maybe it's a little bit better, but ultimately, is it going to be much worse than an Abu Dhabi circuit that most people hate anyway? I don't think so. If a car has a puncture, they might crash in the pit tunnel, says Rock Phonic. That's true. So they've got a slightly longer way into the pit lane, but if you've got a puncture, you've just got to be careful, haven't you? I mean, we have the pit lane in general is very slow and often has some very tight corners. So if you're coming into the pits with a puncture, it's your responsibility not to crash. Of course, if you do crash, it causes issues in that you might block that tunnel and we're into a world of pain. So maybe that's an issue, but look, it's got to be doable. I think it's possible. Clansome says no reverse grids. We're not talking about reverse grids. We're talking about actually doing the circuit the other way around. Right. Oh, look at that. It's 10 o'clock. Blimey, it's 10 o'clock. Right, I want to say a massive thank you to you all before we go. Genuinely, I'm literally wringing the neck of that. That's done. Right, like 2020, the whiskey's done. Massive thank you, genuinely, to you all. I really, really appreciate, honestly, everybody's input, both here on the live shows on a Monday night, but every day on my socials and on the questions and input you put into my channel. I genuinely, as you see on the ticker that's running along the bottom of the screen all night tonight, it has meant the world to me. In 2020, when a lot of you have messaged me saying, your channel's been great for me because we've been locked down, it's really helped me get through this, you know, it's brought F1 to life. I appreciate all those comments, so thank you. But I promise you it's done the same for me. And I couldn't have had that benefit unless you guys were invested and fully involved in this. So really, really appreciate it. Massive thank you. As I said, no more live shows this year, but I'll be back very soon as we can in 2021 with more stuff to talk about. I may drop more videos over the Christmas period, but who knows? I'm not going to commit to them because I'm fully in holiday mode, as you can see right now. By the way, I should just say, if you want to get involved in Wheeler Dealer's Dream Car, we're doing a new series. You may have seen this on my socials. Check out my Instagram or Twitter, because if you want to get involved, if you've got a dream car in mind and a car that you'd like to donate to the project and some cash perhaps to help Mike and I trade up, there's a website you can go to register your interest and tell us which car it is you've got, what you'd like to achieve, if there's a story behind it. We'd love to hear from you massively, because that was one of my favourite shows to do, Wheeler Dealer's Dream Car. So we're back in on that one, a new series. If you want to do that, check out my socials and get involved. But that's it. Have a great Christmas, guys. Enjoy yourselves. I hope you can manage to enjoy the whatever the current situation is wherever you are. I know it's not ideal, but look, nothing's ideal in life. We've got to make the most of it. We've got to find the positives in whatever the situation is around us. That's exactly what I'm doing tonight. But look, stay safe. Don't be a dick. Have a great time and enjoy whatever you can over the festive period. I'll see you in 2021. Ta-da!